Okay, we're now recording.
Thank you, Kimberly. Okay, I'm going to call the Finance and Risk Management Subcommittee meeting of San Diego Community Power to order for May 18th. Roll call. Mayor Dedina is here and I am here. We can begin the meeting. Do we have any public comments?
There are no public comments.
Thank you. Move on to item 4. Anything to add or remove from the agenda? Hearing none, we'll keep going. Number 5 is the treasurer's report.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that one, even though we'll probably make this short because we're going to talk a lot about budgets in the following items. So right now, I think the one thing that we're keeping an eye on is our liquidity. As you know, we're running our operations from our debt as we wait for customer receipts or large customer receipts to come in, which won't actually occur until really the next fiscal year. So that's the main thing that's on our plate right now is, do we have the cash to pay our expenses? How much do we need to draw down from the debt, et cetera? And then as planned for the fiscal year, we're looking at a loss for the fiscal year. So I think we'll get a better picture of that in June. Obviously that's last month, but even before the month is over, we'll get a better picture of where we're probably going to end up. But anyways, that's just kind of a brief treasurer's report on the state of affairs right now.
Can I just ask you a question? So I'm really dumb.
Okay.
When you pay back that debt, what's the structure of the payment? Like, how do you manage that?
Well, I don't think we're required to pay down the debt for, I believe, 2 years. So I'm not sure what you mean by the structure of it. When we have enough cash reserves from our normal operations, so it'll be after we've been online for some time. At that point, we'll just make either partial payments. Maybe we'll pay it all off at once. I think that's yet to be determined. But the principal payments, that's not going to happen for at least, I think, to the end of 2022. I could be wrong about that. And we will be paying interest payments in the short term. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mike? Thank you very much. Move on to item 6, review and recommend board approval for the FY21 budget amendment.
Can I start that before we start, Mr. Chairman?
Absolutely.
Just wanted to say preliminarily that when we got the agenda finished today, and if you look at it, there are at least three items that we were asking the committee to make a recommendation to the board, but we didn't include any backup information. All it is a title. And so we're actually revamping our procedures that you won't be receiving in the future anything that requires a recommendation without a staff report in the backup, just like we would do for a regular board meeting. We're putting you at an extreme disadvantage to ask you to do that. If it's a report, it might just be a PowerPoint and we would just give it to you. We wouldn't necessarily include that in the agenda packet. But when you get the agenda packet, any decision item will be accompanied by a staff report. And then we're modifying when it gets to, because it's just awkward. It's not really the way we should be doing it. And so we're correcting it. And then as we get to the board meeting, rather than have a committee report item like we've had in the past, and then we asked Serge last time, and you were doing it, Greg, to give a committee report, and it's sort of out of context. It's before, most of the items that come to you go to the board anyway. And so what we're going to do is modify the staff reports so that they should and will include your recommendation. So you won't be doing it on an ad hoc basis at the beginning. It'll be a part of the board report when they get it as the staff item, and then you can elaborate on it, or you can make other comments during the discussion of that item so that they all come in sequence. So we're going to make that change also, because it was a little awkward the way it was before, because it was sort of out of context and it was like 3 items in one, and we weren't really approaching it quite the right way. So now we're doing it more sequential and more in order, and we think it makes a lot more sense. So I just want to make the report on those two items. And
Just
so,
working the kinks out. Sounds good.
well, in
Yeah, well,
some-
Greg, it was my fault because I was asked to summarize a 500 point analysis.
no, it was
I
my
meant
fault. I should give you
finance
that.
nerd analysis, and I failed at it, and it was a moment of huge awkward embarrassment.
He's still on probation.
Shaking
but
their head.
we
So
can't trust him to do it anymore. So with that, we do have the next three items are items that we do want you to make a recommendation on. We do have staff presentation for each of these. And so I think we're okay for today, but you won't come in blind from here on. So we'll make sure you have enough information to do what we're asking you to do today, because it's pretty straightforward. And so we're going to have the staff members who have worked on these and who are in effect responsible for these to give you a report. One is the amendment of the existing budget for this year and the new budget for next year, and then the NIM report that we've been talking about, the NIM rate and that sort of thing. We want to give you some background on that, et cetera. So with that, I think, Cody, are you leading item 6, I think, right?
This will be a group effort. So thanks, Bill. Mike is on the line. Mike Mahara, who you already heard from briefly. And then we also have a new
Oh, yeah.
employee who I do not think you've all seen yet, but he's going to be very relevant to this committee going forward. So Eric Washington is on the line, on the Zoom, and he's our new CFO. So if you can't see all the faces, make sure you scroll over to see him. And Eric, I don't know if you want to say hello, but
Yes,
go ahead.
Yes. Director Greg, Mayor Davina, it's a pleasure meeting you. I look forward to making your acquaintance. I'm happy to be a part of the team, and I've been able to come alongside of Cody and Mike to really put some finishing touches on the amended budget for fiscal year 21, as well as the proposed budget for fiscal year 22. So with that, Cody or Mike, you want to lead us off?
Okay.
Yeah, so somebody's speaking. So Mike, I think if you want to orient the folks to the structure of the budget. So we've done a couple things. We've restructured the budget the way it looks a little bit. If you recall, for those of you around a year ago, we provided you quite a detailed budget. It was all startup madness of here's everything we might think about. And so what Mike has done in his time being here with us, supporting our team, is really restructure that to a budget structure you're more familiar seeing. And then we have two parts. So we're first going to talk about FY21 amendments to our FY21 budget. And then once we clear those decks, we'll talk about FY22 on the next item. So Mike, do you want to start with a orientation to this?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, the first budget that was approved in advance of this fiscal year had 20, 30 separate accounts that were kind of a mix of department related, specific task related, and what we call natural classification related. And so really what we've done here, we tried to follow the pretty much exclusively what we call natural classification, which is what is this expense? What is the type of the expense it is? So not a departmental budget, kind of the opposite of that. And really, especially early on in these operations, it makes sense because we're really focusing on one thing, buying and selling electricity, right? And so so we've kind of done away with the department approach from the presentation, but of course the pieces of each account derive from various departments' needs, et cetera. So there's a lot more detail here, obviously. So the column that says original budget, I do have an asterisk there, and that's down there. There's a footnote that says that this is the reclassified version. So it was too hard to show 25 different accounts rolled up into the 10 or so accounts that we have here. But anyway, the total numbers that were approved are in that original budget. And then of course, the next column is the amendments, it's the changes. And then the final column is the proposed amended budget. So this is for this current fiscal year, which is going to end in June 30th. And of course, we have new contracts on the energy side. So we have a few more known dollars on the cost side, whereas before we had no contracts entered into. The revenue side, we have a better feel for where we're going to end up there. So There have been some significant changes in those two items in particular. The other cost items are pretty straightforward. Your personnel costs, that's your staffing, benefits, taxes, etc. Professional services and consultants, that is legal, program consultants, technical consultants, marketing and outreach. I think the big costs there, we do have a consultant in that, but we also have a large amount of mailers, notifications that go out, so that's a big cost there. And then general administration, which is pretty much everything else. That category is going to change in the next year as we start having office space, et cetera, but those are the main categories. And then I guess I just step back. So this is all on the accrual basis. So this isn't the cash basis. This isn't dependent on when cash comes in or cash goes out. This is full accrual accounting, which is going to align with our full GAAP financial statements that we present to the board or that gets audited. So this is going to be very closely in alignment with our main financial statements. So that was another reason we've tried to reformat these expense categories to match up with the GAAP accounting. And so part of the GAAP accounting would require this non-operating revenues and expenses section, which is below the third section down below. And at this point, it's just interest expense right there. And at the very bottom, this is a bit of a departure from how we originally budgeted. And it's not completely atypical for government entities to budget non-accrual expenses or non-accrual inflows. One of the big items that was on the first budget was loan proceeds. So that is important, it's money coming in, but it's not a revenue. So we wanted to put that more as an information item to show you there are some sources of money, but it's not a true revenue in the accrual sense. And same thing with collateral postings, which is large dollar amounts going out. I think the largest portion of these are for a collateral requirement on some of our energy contracts. So some of that money will come back at either the end of that contract or pro rata throughout certain parts of the contract. So even though those are money outflows, they're not actually expenses on the accrual basis. So anyway, that's maybe a little technical, but just that's how we've designed this budget. Is first, the top sections is the accrual basis, and that's what you are authorizing us to spend, right? That's what you're actually authorizing. That's what we're going to bring to the board for approval. And those non-budgeted cash inflow and outflow items are supplemental. So that's a little bit of an overview on the structure of it. And this is for this current year budget. The next upcoming fiscal year budget is going to be laid out exactly the same. So we won't have to go over that again, but I don't know if Cody, if you want to go over any specific numbers.
I'm happy to walk through some of the specifics, or if you all just have questions on items that have changed or things of interest, I'm happy to do that. So for example, looking at the original budget, our revenues start at 22 million and get adjusted over time to 26. And that really is just a change in assumptions based on our timing and our phasing of customer enrollment. Those types of things are what explain the changes. And so we tried to put a description of that here to be really brief, just for you to understand. Similarly, cost of energy, we were projecting a year ago, and now we actually have numbers to put in there. So our costs have gone down happily a little bit, at least from our projections.
Just as someone who runs a nonprofit in a city, I just maybe give me the thinking about the optimism, the $3.8 million optimistic increase. Are you getting like poll numbers or something, or already pre-enrollment, and that's what gives you that optimism?
It's actually not so much that. We do have some assumptions around opt-outs. I guess that would be your optimism, if I could say, customer retention rather than opt-outs. And we've actually we've been more conservative there with the COVID and some other changes. We actually increased our opt-out assumptions. But what did change there as well is just the timing of enrollment of customers more so. So our phase one load was slightly smaller phase two, the timing of that changed just a little bit. So that really is reflecting the change here more so than assumptions like you're talking about, Mayor Dedina, of optimism and things.
And isn't it true that we're 90% of the way into this budget? So most of these are kind of known numbers rather than estimated numbers. So there's
More
only
accurate,
2 months left. So these are almost actuals. And then when we get to the next year's, which you're going to do next, then you can see where we've done some adjusting for estimated future. So these are actually almost really pretty good numbers.
Yeah. Well, I would have a caveat there in that the year is certainly mostly over, but the bulk of the revenue and the bulk of the cost of energy really are truly on the back end in June.
Yeah.
So some of those numbers, we definitely have a better, idea of the volume that we're going to be looking at, but anytime there's a rollout, things can change depending on, the customer's billing cycle. Some of the assumptions there might change enough that a single month's revenue could have a little variance. The good thing about volume changes is when you have a decrease in revenue or an increase in revenue, you tend to have a corresponding change in your cost of energy, at least on some of the load costs. So, we do expect those to move in tandem if some of our volumes are off. But there's still, June's going to be the big month. So there's still a bit not up in the air, but we don't have solid numbers on those yet. They're not actuals yet.
Okay.
Can someone summarize the change in the collateral postings?
I was looking at the direction of that. I think on the original budget, it was, so that section down below has inflows and outflows. So the inflows are shown as a positive and the negatives are shown as a negative. The outflows are shown as a negative, but looking at that proposed amended amount, I think that 5.5 million collateral postings should be a negative because it would be an outflow. So we'll change that before we bring that to the board, but we have $5.5 million going out for collateral and expecting potentially $24 million, which is the amount above that, the principal, coming in. So yeah, those should be moving in different directions. Thanks for pointing that out.
Thank you.
Do you want to just keep asking questions? I don't need to walk through every line. I don't know if that's actually helpful, but I think overall, if you look at the change in that position, we did a fairly decent job of making projections at where we'd be and then tracking well to that number. And that's kind of the bottom line we were looking at.
Yeah, I don't have any further questions at the moment. Mayor, do you have anything further?
No, just one more, I guess, a minor question. So, again, looking at revenues, are the revenues fairly consistent throughout the year? Are there periods when, like you say now, I know you're doing startup, but is it normally in the energy business fairly consistent or not?
No, it's very seasonal. And on top of being seasonal with winter rates and summer rates, we don't even see that full swing yet because we're still enrolling customers. So this represents through June, which means we've enrolled just the first bit of commercial industrial customers in June. So next year you'll see a better sense of that, and you'll see the full seasonality over 12 months. But we're still, even at the end of FY22, which is fast forwarding next June, we'll still just be enrolling the tail end of our commercial customers. So we still have a couple more years of fluctuations before we see some consistency there. But mostly it's seasonal. Once we get in full swing, it's seasonal from the winter to summer.
Okay.
And before we leave this, I might draw your attention to the fact that you look at the revenues here, they're roughly $25 million. And notice energy is a substantial portion of that. 80 or 85% of our budget is energy costs. So when Mike was talking about moving in tandem, if you have more sales than you thought you would, your expenses are also going to go up. The differential is a much smaller number. But keep those orders of magnitude in mind as we flip to the next page, which is where we're starting to get influx of customers, and you'll see about a 10-fold increase in revenues and energy costs. So we're starting to roll into where we're going to end up with some pretty big numbers next year. And the other thing to say is that this budget, and I'll have to say this is certainly before I came, and Cody and Mike and those folks, that this is a bit of a shot in the dark. You know, it's a startup company. We don't know exactly where the demands are going to come from. One of the tests that I look at is in our operating expenses. We have some categories that we've increased, some we've decreased. That means we didn't we weren't too optimistic or too pessimistic. It was a balance here. And I think to come this close at that period of time when this budget was adopted is pretty good, because there was really not a lot known about what all was going to happen and where the demands were going to be. So I think it's a pretty good first effort.
One other thing I forgot to mention, the ratepayer, the revenues under ratepayers is we, if you recall, the board adjusted our rates. So that also caused a slight change as well. So a lot of factors that go into it, but you'll see further in FY22. So again, this is FY21, an amended budget to kind of close out the year for us.
Are you looking for action from the subcommittee on this?
Yes.
Yeah, so recommend board approval of an FY21 amended budget.
So I will make that motion.
A second. Oh, do I make a motion to approve? I guess I second it. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
All those in favor, say
Aye.
aye. Recommendation passes.
Thank you.
Item 7, FY22 budget.
All right, same thing. So Mike, do you want to run through again quickly? Hopefully you all
Yeah,
can,
yeah.
I'll look smaller. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess on this one, we can talk a little bit more about the numbers. The layout's the same. As Bill mentioned, revenue is more than tenfold increase. And most of this is the customer base that's getting online in June of this year, of the year we're currently in. So that's the commercial load. So that's where a lot of the revenues are coming into Director Dina's question, the seasonality. We don't show the month by month budget, but I don't know the exact. I think there's 40+% of the revenue is going to come in the summer. It really comes in the summer. That's where we're making our big margins. And then you actually plan to run a loss, or close to it at least, in the winter months. So it's those commercial customers that have a lot more variability in the rates. They have a big seasonality difference. But anyway, this is for the whole year, of course. So yeah, revenue's going up to $318 million, and we're going to set aside a 1% estimation for bad debts on that. I think I don't know if we have all the historical data on what SDG&E's uncollectible rate is. I think it's a bit less than 1%, maybe closer to 0.5% or a little less than that. But that's historical pre-COVID. We know that people are having more of a difficult time paying their bills. In addition, we don't have as much leverage on collections as they might. They can turn off the power, all that kind of stuff. So we're estimating what we think is probably more realistic, closer to 1%, which, in terms of a large business, that is really good, right? Most businesses would love to have that type of collection success. But anyway, just to kind of show you that we bake that into our revenues. So we know that not all of the amounts we bill will end up being collected. Moving on to the cost of energy. Now we have to pay 100% of our cost of energy, no matter what. So we're going to be paying for that. And this includes all the way through the third phase. The revenue did too. So this is cost of energy for capacity, for our load. And that's, I think, and maybe other transactions costs relating to that. But again, that is the business. That is what we're doing. We're buying electricity. It's the largest expense by far. And I know that periodically Byron gives updates on the procurement efforts and all of that, but that's where all of those numbers flow through, obviously. Personnel costs, this it's not a shot in the dark. We have plans for hiring and timeline for hiring and positions that need to be filled. So those are based on those assumptions, but depending on either accelerated hiring or a delay in hiring, those costs could change a little bit. Professional services and
Mike,
consultant.
if I could just interrupt you on,
Yes,
on a lot of
please.
these, on personnel costs, professional services, marketing and outreach, those series of costs, we have a much better handle of where we think we're needed, where costs have gone up. We do have a pretty detailed assessment that goes into these numbers. So of course it could change. We are a startup mode, but having year one under our belt really helped us to refine a lot of these costs. You know, included in professional services is our regulatory efforts, both legislative and analytical, and we now have a better grasp of what it takes to really engage heavily in the Public Utilities Commission and legislative arena and those types of things. So all of that history from this year and our experience really helped to build these numbers as well.
And their fees from Calpine and SDG&E are a fairly major part of that classification too, aren't they?
Yeah, so under professional services, yeah, you'll see that note there that we have to start paying some of our bills that we're accruing, and two of those will be fees to Calpine, and also we pay monthly service fees to SDG&E for handling of account changes.
I'm not gonna, I don't want to make your life more complicated, but as someone who runs a nonprofit that does extensive marketing and outreach, you may want to think at some point of separating those out, because you know, I start thinking about what marketing and paying social media is versus city grants. You may have different people managing those. You know, I'm assuming it's the same thing in the city of Mesa, Greg. It's just that those just seem like very different things to me. So maybe I'm wrong, but you know, it may be easier in the future to start thinking about separating those out if they're very different structured programs.
Just to clarify, tell me what you're separating out: marketing and community and outreach. Those two categories. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, just because, you know, when I read that and I see, you know, large outreach and community presence anticipated, including pilot member city grants. Giving a grant to a city is a very different sort of like thing, operation or task than the marketing, you know, social media ads, whatever you're doing. It's just and you may have different people doing that. Maybe you don't, but it just seems to be a very different.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's almost a program expense for us, actually.
Yeah, and that's fine. I'm just thinking in terms of when you guys think and you have program managers or something, and just those two things for what you guys do are very different. But that's all.
We have like I mentioned, a detailed pages and pages of spreadsheets that go into this, so they're broken out separately in the back end. But if you would like to see them separately, we're happy to think about that too.
Also would like to mention on the personnel cost, we will be bringing an updated org chart for the board's review, so you can see that we do have a plan for adding the positions. You know, because it is a fairly significant increase, but we're going from roughly 3 or 4 people to the end of the process, which is about 18 months from now, to about 22 or 3 employees, and we can show you where those are. We can show you also where the ones have been added, because we have added some, and you've all met those and seen those folks. So you know, it's subject to modification as we go along, but we've held pretty closely to what the original plan was, and we can show you how that gets implemented so that we can carry out our functions.
Yeah, it's a big increase. I mean, like really big. Yeah. So that's a big task, right? I mean, you know, so I think that's why the strategic planning is important. I would hope that you include that strategic planning and sort of like, you know, a consultant to help you guys through this for at least another, you know, 2 years or something. It's, you don't want to skimp on that. You don't want to skimp on having some assistance and helping you and the board through this, you know, the staff and board through that process, because it's, you know, I know if you've done this before, Bill, but you know, it's, again, as someone who runs, you know, helps oversee a city, but also had started a nonprofit, it's a big, you know, hiring that many people and getting operations, and just, you know, the more help you can get, I think you'd be
part of her function for us in this initial effort is to also help us with team building and learning how to work together and work effectively, and what our culture is and that sort of thing. That's also a part of this process, in addition to the strictly strategic planning portion of it.
Right. But you'll keep that in the budget for next year as well?
We can, yeah.
Yeah, I would. I wouldn't, and it's for the following year, just plan on having that as part of your budget, because it's too much money to not have some assistance and helping you guys through this process.
Mhm.
So that's just my feeling.
No, good
Can't
point.
hurt, right?
Good point.
And then the last area that is of interest usually is a change in that position. And so you'll see this year, it looks a little different than last year for what we're proposing. And this is where Eric being on the job for, I think, 6 days now, is that what we decided?
6 days.
Well, he didn't get to do much as far as putting in the last two budgets together. I think this is where he's already been thinking and chewing on some ideas here for what those funds could look like and what we could do with them, and how to bring back some policy decisions to this committee and to the board around those the excess revenues that you see there.
Yeah, so part of that will be to develop some form of a policy around what I'll just tag it cash management for now. And back to a point that you made earlier, Mayor Dabina, about repaying the debt. So some of those funds could be earmarked for paying off the two private party notes, as well as help us manage the revolving line of credit and potentially set up some reserve funds, ultimately to build up a cash deposit that would position us to start to pursue credit ratings, things like that. So more discussion to be had around that as we sort of frame and develop out a policy, but we'll certainly bring that back to the committee for review and further discussion.
Yeah, I mean, there's two different philosophies on paying that debt back, right? I mean, either get rid of, just eliminate it, or, you structure it. Very different philosophies on how you would manage that. So anyway.
Right. And all of those would be brought back for further discussion and would be considered in developing that cash management policy.
Yeah, I mean, it is important, I think. I think the board will definitely want, and just from a public sector perspective and educating the public on that, just having a handle on that and being able to illustrate those alternatives would probably be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I could just tell you that obviously our bank is also looking at that line item carefully and checking it, I think quarterly at least, if not more, every time we step up our line of credit. So it's we're in a good position now, but we definitely want to be conservative.
Yes.
So this is our FY22 proposed budget. This same action that we're seeking, Director Himura, which is recommend board approval of this FY22 proposed budget. And we actually are just bringing this to you now for recommendation. We'll bring back the final in June in case the board has any further insights or changes.
Based on the $17 million surplus I'm seeing, I'm going to recommend approval. All right. Mayor, would you second that for me, please?
I'm sorry, it's a formal motion. Yes, I second that motion.
Not at all. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
I
Okay,
think
recommendation passes on to the board.
and the other thing to keep in mind is that we don't anticipate any rate increases in this budget.
I'm going to get back to the speech about it. The purpose of this isn't for you guys to educate yourselves, it's to educate the public and the board. So make this as easy and fun and friendly as possible. So whatever kind of PowerPoint you can do with pie charts or whatever, especially showing the increases. And I do it I got the city to do that. So it's just it's not just the straight budget. It's something that shows a better representation of what's happening, especially the increases. And even though my board always asks me for the monthly, what our monthly sort of like input is in terms of grants and stuff. That's really helpful because you're right, we have shortfalls. But anything you do to make this a little bit more digestible and easy to follow for the public and the board, I think is helpful. So I hope it would look like this for the board meeting and something just a little bit, easier to follow. I mean, maybe something like one thing like this, but yeah, anything that shows the increases, pie chart, tables, whatever, it's really helpful.
The other thing to note,
I like the fun comment.
Yep, got it. We'll take that and noted.
and the other thing to note is that you all will be getting monthly budget updates each month of the year on how we're doing in administering the budget. And then you will be forwarding that on to the board so that you can keep track during the year and we'll want to work with you and the board in terms of what do we think and what do you think are the important things we need to highlight and point out in the budget, in the budget administration. Revenues, obviously, are they up, down? Where are we in revenues? Because it's a big number. Expenses, the power supply expenses would be important. Reserves, the surplus funds, where do we stand each month? How are we doing on that? So there's at least 3 or 4 sort of key indicators in there that we'll want to make sure that we highlight each month for you and the board to you to be able to judge how we're doing financially and how we're doing in administrating the budget.
Chair Himura, I realized I don't know that if there was any public comment for these items, but I think we're going pretty quickly, so I'm not sure if you missed any or not.
Kimberly, is there any public comment that we're missing?
No, there's no public comment.
Thank you. Thanks, Cody.
Can we just go back to the debt thing? Because I'm sorry, I'm a little obsessed with it since cities can't go into debt. My nonprofit's never on the debt, but we did pay down our pension obligations recently in the city of IB. I don't know, Greg, if you guys did that, but we got a payment from Caltrans. So we showed that we could, by paying down our pension debt in advance, that we would save, millions of dollars that we could reinvest back in the community. It was just a good, public sector company, agency trying to save money. So that's something you guys, I think at some point, the way you structure that argument and frame is really important in showing, well, if we pay down this or pay off this debt, then we save this much money in interest payments, which we can then reinvest back in the community or something. It's just a good way of framing it and looking at it. Because obviously, in the private sector, private companies may not want to pay their debt, right? It's a different philosophy. But anyway, so that was just my recent experience with it.
Just a comment on that. On the most likely course of action is we're probably going to need that liquidity for some time. So certainly to go through this next winter period, we're going to need that, and then potentially the following winter period also. But yeah, that is always, it always gets applause from, the board and the public when you do finally pay off that debt. But most likely I think it's going to be a liquidity need in the short, not so long term. But yeah, that's a good point. That'll be something we'll need to talk about, how we're going to structure, whether we want that long term to increase our liquidity for credit rating purposes. Even if we pay it down, we still might have the revolving credit line. So all those things, yeah, we'll have to discuss.
Okay, anything else on that item? Thank you. We'll move on to item 8, which is the net energy metering surplus compensation rate and policy amendment.
Okay, we're going to ask our staffer Nelson Lamelli to give really it's probably the second or third time he's given it the explanation of NEM and what we're proposing that the board adopt. I think it's very, very well done. It does explain a fairly complex issue pretty clearly. He gave it to the Community Advisory Committee a couple of days ago, and we're going to be giving the same to the board, maybe a little more expanded, but we appreciate feedback in terms of, are we on target here? Is it clear? Because we can make changes before it goes to the board, but it is something we'd like for you all to receive, to look at it, and hopefully recommend approval to the board. So Nelson, are you ready?
Yes, and good afternoon, directors. Director Medina, I heard you say earlier today you wanted a fun presentation, so hopefully this is what you consider fun. There's some animations in here, so Kimberly, if you try to click from current slide, see if that pops up. So on to the left. Yes, let's see if this works. Oh, I guess it didn't.
I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish. So are you not seeing your slides?
I am, but I was trying to see if you can do the current slide, but it's okay, Kimberly, we can just go ahead. So I wanted to talk about net energy metering. So this is, I want to provide a little bit of background information into this subject, because really we're asking you to take action on 4 items. One, which is establishing the net surplus compensation for the organization. 2 is establishing a net surplus compensation cap or a limit. 3 is standardizing the billing for NEM customers. And then 4 is, if you adopt all of the 3 before, is to amend the NEM program policy that the board adopted back in December. So Kimberly, if you go to the next slide and go on to the next one. So this is just some background information on net energy metering. Can you go to the next one, Kimberly? So net energy metering is a very long and complicated subject, and we can spend hours. I think we spent about an hour with the committee discussing this. But I wanted to note that we are not affecting the transmission or distribution charges or any of the way that the program works on that side. Any minimum bill payments, grid access charges, or any other charges that the utility may, can, or is proposing to charge customers, that's a separate discussion that needs to be had at the CPUC. And the board is going to have an opportunity to weigh in on those at a later date. So to set the context, Kimberly, if we go to the next slide, we wanted to present to you how many customers we're talking about. And so when we pull the numbers, we look and we see that as of February of this year, we have close to 90,000 eligible NEM accounts that will be transitioning over to our service. As you can see, they're primarily based in the city of San Diego, and that's population sizes as well. But you can see that the vast majority are actually residential customers. So we have about 88,000 accounts that are considered residential accounts. The rest are divided between commercial and industrial. And so I just provided some numbers for a breakdown. So next slide. So because net surplus compensation is sometimes confused as like a NEM rate, or it's confused as to how the NEM program works, I wanted to provide some background information on how the NEM program currently works across the state. So next slide, Kimberly. So I took my company, I incorporated myself, and I installed a solar system on my building and interconnected with SDG&E. Next slide, Kimberly. So whenever that solar system is producing energy, it is first used by the building. So before it even touches the grid, that electricity is feeding any consumption by the building. Next slide. When that customer, me, consume less electricity than what the system is producing, that extra electricity is then sent to the grid. And so the grid is used sort of like a battery system. Next slide. However, when I consume more electricity than what my system is producing, I draw that electricity from the grid. And so on a monthly basis, what the utility does is they determine how much electricity was sent to the grid and how much electricity was consumed, and they add it all up. And so when this happens, if you go to the next slide, Kimberly, you get to a situation where you become either a net generator or a net consumer. And I'm sorry that this slide is a little busy. It was supposed to be going step by step. But essentially, when I, as a customer, export electricity to the grid, that electricity is paid at the same rate schedule or that the customers enrolled at. So if I had consumed electricity and I was going to pay 19 cents a kilowatt hour, but now that I'm exporting, I'm now getting paid 19 cents a kilowatt hour. So whatever that rate schedule is and when I'm exporting the electricity is how much that electricity is being credited as a net generator. And then as I explained, when you consume electricity from the grid, you are a net consumer and you have net consumption, and that is just charged according to your rate schedule. So I wanted to make that distinction between how the rates are compensated. It's entirely based on your rate schedule. And so those numbers will vary based on what the customer's rate schedule is. This happens every single month. And so Kimberly, if you go to the next slide, the next 2 slides. So because this happens every month, it happens for 12 months. So the utility is tracking how much electricity is being sent to the grid and how much is being consumed. And so they track that for 12 months, and then they add it all up at the end. And when they do that process of adding up all of the charges and all of the credits, it's called a true up. And so when you hear people talking about true ups, this is what they're talking about. It's essentially everything is being added up. So as an example, as you can see in the graphic here, when it comes to a true up, we look at the monthly charges, and at the end we get a final number. And if that number, and you can see down there, is a negative number, that means that this customer is a net generator, and so they don't owe anything to the utility at that point. However, if it's a positive number, then the customer is a net consumer of electricity, and they are then sent a bill by the utility, and they are required to pay that bill at the end of the true up. And so the true up goes for 12 months, and it's called the relevant period. So if we go to the next slide, Kimberly, having that background, I want to talk about the first action item that you are going to take, which is the review and recommend the establishment of a net surplus compensation. Go to the next slide. So the net surplus compensation, again, is only paid for annual net generation. So when we talk about net surplus compensation, we go from this monthly basis and then start talking entirely on an annual basis at the true up piece. The net surplus compensation for the utilities is already set at the wholesale rate. So the CPUC has rules around how much that compensation can be, and it's based on the wholesale rate of electricity. It is not used to calculate monthly generation credits. So again, those generation credits are entirely determined by the customer's rate schedule. I'm going to provide some examples here. So Kimberly, if you go to the next slide, I provide an example of what we mean. So with net surplus compensation, we really only care and only want to look at is the net usage in kilowatt hours. So in this example that we looked at before, if you see the net usage, when you add all of those up, all of the negative numbers, which is generation, and all the positive numbers, which are consumption, you get to a final amount, the true up amount. And in this case, it's negative 450 kilowatt hours. So in this case, this customer is a net generator. In this situation, that's when the net surplus compensation rate would then kick in. So if you go to the next slide, Kimberly, you will see that as of May, SDG has published their most recent net surplus compensation rate. It is about 2.7 cents a kilowatt hour. So we take that negative 450 and we multiply it by that 2.7 cents. And then the customer in this case would get compensated $12. So for our staff recommendation, if you go to the next slide, our staff recommendation is to set the net surplus compensation for SDCP to match SDG&E's net surplus compensation, but to distinguish ourselves and to have an adder for incentivizing customers to generate 100% renewable local electricity. We want to add three-quarters of a cent per kilowatt hour more. So essentially what our Power 100 premium is, we want to have it as an adder to customers. Setting the net surplus compensation at SDG&E's to match SDG&E's net surplus compensation and adding that 0.0075 cents a kilowatt hour. It does have a financial payment, could potentially result in a financial payment to customers of $2.8 million per year. This is based on a very conservative estimate using the maximum 3-year net surplus compensation rate and then adding that adder. When we look at the CCA landscape, if you go to the next slide, the vast majority of CCAs are using this method of compensating customers based on the net surplus compensation rate. There are really only 3 that are doing retail credits. So we did look at a number of other compensation schemes. So if you go to the next slide, we looked at setting the net surplus compensation to be at parity with SDG&E. And the reason we didn't recommend this or aren't recommending this to the board is that it really doesn't have any differentiation between us and the utility. And it doesn't really give an incentive for customers to stay with SDCP. We looked at setting the compensation rate at double SDG&E's net surplus compensation, but that would mean we would be potentially exposing ourselves to a large financial payment. And then lastly, early on in the CCA formation, a lot of CCAs were cashing out customers at their credit balance. And the reason we're not recommending this is that there is a potential, a very high potential, that we would be compensating customers who are not generators of electricity. So we would be paying them to use our electricity, which we didn't think it was fair. So if we go to the next slide, the first action item that I have before the committee is to recommend to the board that they establish a net surplus compensation rate for SCCP that is set to match SDG&E's, but then I have that adder as an incentive. And so I'll stop there before we go on to the next 2 items or 3 items.
Nelson, I just got a couple of quick questions. Thank you for running through that very complicated subject and making it very easy to understand. So is the proposal for this to be, would it be for the Power On and the Power 100 customers both?
Yes, yeah. So this would be for anybody that is an end customer.
Okay, and then so it's a credit on your bill. It's not, we're not, just like SDG&E does right now, we're not cashing out anybody, right?
So that's an interesting one because our current NEM policy that the board has adopted, it stipulates that if a customer has over $100 of these credits, they get sent a check. If it's anything less than $100, then that gets rolled over into the next billing cycle, essentially.
So it would be a cash out if it's over $100.
Correct, yeah.
And you said that's our current policy?
Yes, that is what the board adopted back in December.
Okay. That's all my questions for now. Mayor, do you have questions?
That makes sense. So thanks. Do you need me to make a motion, Greg, or?
Please.
Yeah, I make a motion to approve.
I'll second it. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. We're good.
Great, thank you. So the next piece is, now that we adopted the net surplus compensation, or telling the board to recommend to adopt, is we also want to recommend to the board that they establish a compensation cap. So Kimberly, if you go to the next 2 slides. So we're recommending that the board adopt a limit to the net surplus compensation and set that limit at $2,500 per account per year. And the reason we're recommending this is that it's set to really minimize the financial impact to our customers. It would protect us in case there's an unlikely event where wholesale markets become really volatile and they spike incredibly. It would take a lot for a customer to generate enough to meet that cap. On average, when we looked at the numbers, on average, the typical average net generator is only exporting about 1,773 kilowatt hours a year, which when you translate it to that net surplus compensation comes out to about $100 a year. But in the unlikely event that we get another situation where there's a major shutdown or there's big spike in energy prices, we want to be able to financially protect our customers. And so we're recommending to the board to adopt a limit for that compensation.
Any comments or questions? Makes sense. I'll make a motion to approve staff recommendation.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, passes. Thank you.
Great, so next slide. So the next item that I want your review and recommendation is standardizing our true up and billing method. So the next slide. So our current board policy for the NEM programs makes a distinction that residential customers are going to be trued up and billed annually, while commercial and industrial customers are going to be trued up and billed monthly. So under the current policy, residential customers, their generation credits and charges are calculated and banked for 12 months, as you saw in that previous example. they're just kind of banked. At the true up, they potentially would get one massive bill for essentially 12 months worth of electricity usage. And so if you go to the next slide, where staff recommendation is here is that we want to make sure that all NEM customers are standardized across a monthly true up and billing. And so what this means is that if a customer is a net generator and they have generation credits, those are calculated and added into what's called like a NEM credit balance. So they would go into a credit balance and we would be able to show that on our page of the bill. When a customer is a net consumer of electricity in that month, we use those credits to pay for those charges first. And so as you can see in the month of July, as an example here, the customer is a net consumer of electricity. And so they would have been charged $13, but we use the credit balance to pay for that. And so now the credit balance has dropped a little bit, but they still have a credit balance. If the monthly charges, as you see in August, exceed the available credit balance, the credit balance goes to zero. And then we bill the customer for the difference between their charges and the credit balance. And so this method is a lot more customer centric, as it helps customers avoid a large end of the year charges that we have heard with a lot of customers say that they do not like. So if you go to the next slide, Kimberly. So the benefits of the monthly billing and the reason why we're recommending that all customers be standardized on this is that it aligns all customer classes to one billing method. So it simplifies the messaging around this already complicated program. But more importantly, it allows customers to have smaller monthly billing payments instead of one giant bill. And when we look at the numbers in terms of net generation, 70% of our customers are net consumers, meaning they are accruing all of these charges throughout the year, and then at their true up date, they get sent one massive bill, asking them to pay for essentially 12 months worth of usage. Because historically, the solar industry has sized solar systems to only meet about 80% of the customer's electricity needs. And so the concern here is that if a customer gets one giant bill for 12 months worth of usage, they could potentially receive this bill, be shocked by the price, and then see that we are now on the bill and blame us for that increase and opt out. And so we want to minimize the opt-out risk for these customers. And then as a tag along, this also aligns with where the industry is going at large. So the numerous NEM 3.0 proposals out there at the CPC right now, they all call for a change to monthly true-ups and billing. So if we go to the next slide, the action that is before you, that what we are recommending is that the board amend the NEM policy to standardize all customers on a monthly true-up and billing. When we presented this to the Community Advisory Committee, there was a suggestion from one of the members that we offer the yearly true-up as an optional item, as an optional thing, alongside the monthly billing for customers that wanted to enroll. We took that back, asked our billing operators, Calpine, if that was possible, and they said it was. But we want to ask for your feedback in terms of whether we should stick with everyone at monthly or offer this yearly true-up as well.
I don't know about billing. I don't know if you guys want to give us feedback on what you think in terms of what you think is feasible. Greg, I don't know if you have any comments on that, but I don't.
I mean, I think it's nice to show the flexibility if we can pull it off without, drastic increases in our staffing.
Yeah, when I spoke to Calpine, they said it was feasible. They already support this for 2 other CCAs that they work with, and so it would be entirely feasible for them to automate this and be part of the program. It would require the customer to elect to be on this yearly true-up, and so they would need to either contact us or submit some kind of form that we can put on our website that they enroll in this yearly true-up. while the vast majority, the default would be monthly billing to make it easier for customers.
Yeah, I mean, I can appreciate the monthly billing, but for those customers that have had solar for a while, they're used to the annual true up right now. So they might want to stay with that. So being able to keep that option on board, I think that I would prefer to see us go that way if we can accommodate both.
Yeah, sounds good. I agree. I concur.
Okay.
All right, so Mayor, do you want to make a motion?
I motion to approve.
I'll second the mayor's motion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Great. So I will take that back. And then the last item that is as part of this larger item is next slide, Kimberly. Next one is that we have made changes. What you just adopted or recommended to adopt will make changes to the NEM program policy as a whole. And so what we are asking of the board is to delegate the authority to the CEO or his designee to amend the NEM program policy to reflect the changes that the board will hopefully adopt in the last 3 items. And so that's what's before you.
I move to approve.
I'll second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 And with that, wraps up my item. Thank you.
Kimberly, is there any public comment on this item? Just as we close it up.
There's no public comment.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nelson. Well done.
Hopefully that was fun for you, Director Dadina.
Oh, it was super great. I actually learned something new, so that's good. No, so thank you.
He has
Thank you.
nice animations in the PowerPoint when it's in full view mode, so it's even
Graphics are always
more fun. Yeah.
Okay, that brings us to item 9. Any committee member announcements? None from me either. Thank you all very much. It is 4:05 and we are adjourned. See you
Thank you
next
very much,
month.
everyone.
Thank you. See ya.